Hello, everybody, and welcome back. I hope you guys had another good week. So, we finished your first major assignment. Congratulations! We are making it through the semester. We are just about halfway now, which is great. You guys are making a lot of really great progress here. So, just take a second and congratulate yourself on, getting it this far and finishing your first major assignment. So, good job. Okay, so basically this week you guys were finishing up your first time really designing your own objects here. So you're designing an object for your story. You had only a couple steps left due this week. First, you had to do your orthographic drawings. That's basically you had to draw flat, non-perspective drawings of all the different views, front, back, side, top, bottom of your object. And then you had to draw your object in perspective. And I will say, some of you did struggle a little bit more with the perspective than I expected. Like there's a few of you, actually a bunch of you, kind of like forgot some of the steps that we had worked on earlier. So I want to make sure you guys see this so I can show you, where you got tripped up. I know sometimes it's hard to go from doing practice exercises to doing more real world examples here. Sometimes there's a little bit of a loss of that connection there. So I want you guys to remember all this stuff we've been learning, all this stuff we've been working on this semester. And remember, you can go back and rewatch videos. Like a few of you tripped up on the measuring line, which I feel like you guys were doing a really good job with back a couple weeks ago, and now I feel like maybe you just forgot some of the steps. So remember, the previous videos are there. They're all still there for you to watch. So I don't want you to think that, you can't go back, because it is the benefit of an online class. So take advantage of what you can. If you are struggling with something, remember to go back to those previous lessons, even for just a little bit of a refresher. But overall, I think you guys did a good job here. Let us get into this. You also had your model sheet, which is basically your final presentation of your object. You had to put together your orthographic and your perspective view on a page. In later major assignments, you may have to put more things on the page. And I really want you to think about the layout of the page. This is what you're presenting to someone else. So when I'm grading the model sheet, I am taking into account like how nicely you laid it out and made it a presentation. So that part can be an easy grade because it doesn't take very long, but you got to put a little bit of thought in it to think about how you can arrange all your stuff nicely on one page to present your object. Okay? And as always, 10 points for handing in your Photoshop files. And, size, file type, all that stuff is always an account. But at this point, you guys seem to be doing a pretty good job with that, which I'm happy with. So we can focus more on the work than worrying about file size and all that stuff here. Okay, so let us get into this. I think that's all I wanted to talk about. Here you can see a few people I didn't get anything from, which is going to hurt your grade, unfortunately. But remember, you can still hand it in late, and it may look drastic how much it hurts your grade at first, because right now it's this one grade is going to be worth 40% of your grade at the moment. And that's just the way the math works out. We will have 2 other major assignments that we'll be factoring in, but notice that this grade will impact your grade a lot, but that will even out over time. So don't get discouraged if it looks really bad. But a lot of you, I think, did really great here. It's just a few of you that were kind of missing, and a few of you down here who are red. I didn't get anything from the second week. First week, I got the half of your work, but not the second half. But most of you guys handed in, which is great. Okay, so let us get going here. This time I'm going to work from, I think, the middle down. Okay. So, Joseph, you are clearly behind. You only handed in the first half of your work. I'm not going to be going over the work from the previous week, so unfortunately you missed out on that. But otherwise, I'd say you got a good start here, although your studies are supposed to have the images next to it saved on the JPEG. But otherwise, you got a good start here. Just make sure you get the rest of your work in. Cameron, you are also still behind here. So get that in as soon as you can. Nick. Oh, also another one behind. It seems like this back half here, this is where the people who are behind are at. So you're behind too. That's okay. Get it in. Geo, behind. JJ. Juliana. Okay, here we go. So you can see the ones that are marked yellow were the stuff I critiqued from last week, and the ones not marked yellow are the new stuff you handed in. So you did hand in, let's see, your orthographic view. Your orthographic view is really good. Everything lines up. The only problem is I think you need more texture on here. Like, what is this made out of? Is it made out of wood? The inside here looks like you have wood planks, but the outside here, it's just flat. I thought I had the impression from your previous ones, like these look like these are boats made out of wood. Any of these ones here that you have references are made out of wood, and yet you have no wood texture on this. So it's lacking that context. And the details are what make things look real. That texture is the big difference between, you know, something that looks flat and something that looks three-dimensional. So the fact that you're missing it is really kind of a shame here. You know, you're not benefiting from that life you could be bringing to it. And then we get to your perspective. I'm going to open up your Photoshop file in a second, but there's some problems with your perspective here. Here's your model sheet. Your model sheet looks good. I think you did a decent job arranging this. I know this was kind of a tough one to arrange with both your just the object and the orthographic views here, but I think you did a good job, so this looks good. But let's open up your perspective, because I think this is the one thing you kind of struggled on a bit here. Okay, so I obviously I already went through this here. Let's see. What don't we need? We don't want that. We don't want that. Okay, the problem is when I compare this, I'm going to go back to bridge here. When I compare this, if we look at this boat, you look how short your boat is. You know, if we compare like the size of this covered part, it's almost halfway. It's like even more than a third of the boat. But then we look at this, and this looks like a really long boat. And, you know, this looks like it takes up maybe a quarter of your boat. And that's because you messed up on your perspective part. Remember, things are receding away. They look smaller, so they should appear shorter. So your big problem, first of all, is you just made it too long. Let me get a color here. Nope, that is not what I want. Where'd it go? Oh, now let's get a better brush. Here we go. Make it a little bit smaller. Okay, there we go. So the problem is you just made this way too long. Like, this should have been a lot shorter, and that's where people often get messed up. I mean, maybe here it should have ended, not all the way back there, and then it would have looked like it was the right length, and it could be even shorter. And this is all about that diminution. Things look smaller as they get farther away. So you can't make it the same length as this one is, because if you take the same length, I mean, you made it slightly shorter from here to here. But it's just got to be a lot shorter than that, because it just doesn't feel right. And then on top of it, I think you had some trouble with the shape of your boat. First of all, you're supposed to make the box your boat is fitting in, and you made this box right here. You see how deep that is? You made your box this deep and then this long, there's no way that boat could fit in it. Your boat's a lot wider than that. If we go back and look at this, like, look how wide that boat is. You're supposed to make the box your boat would fit in. So if this was me, the box I would have made was probably, let's say here, this wide, and then maybe this deep. Maybe a little bit deeper. Maybe more like, maybe that. That's what I would have done. And then you want to fit your boat within that box. And that's what you didn't do. This front edge of your boat, this front corner, should be touching the front of this box. That's what this box is here for. It's here to make that, to make it fit. So that's why you should have drawn the whole box. You did not draw the whole thing. You only drew kind of like the front end of it. So here's the back-ish. I'm doing this pretty quickly, so this is gonna be rough. Yeah, rough. Anyway, so that's roughly the shape your boat should fit in. That one's probably a little bit off. Let's go put it back here. Yeah, let's stay there. Ooh, that got a little bit off. Okay. Good enough. So this is the box roughly your boat fits in here. So you have to think about that footprint of the boat actually fitting into this shape. So that bottom of the boat, you want to think about, okay, this front tip here, this is the part that's furthest out. So this should be touching this part of the box. The question is, where does that touch? We could look back at your orthographic. Let's look at our front view. It's like almost halfway. It's like just above halfway where that tip is. So you literally, this is where subdivision comes in. You'd find subdivision, maybe it's a little bit above halfway. This is where the tip of your boat should be touching. And then maybe I should change colors here. And then you can figure out, I would figure out where the bottom part is, you know, because this swoops back. I would figure out where the middle, you know, the middle is here. Figure out how far back, and that would be where this touches, that end there. And then you just figure out the footprint on the bottom. How does that fit back here? And then you definitely struggle with this end too, this part of the box, this part of the boat, because this front end, you have it, it's swooping downwards, and that's the shape you have. This kind of swoops downwards. So then why does this one all of a sudden swoop upwards? It doesn't make sense. Really what it should be doing is this side should be swooping downwards like this. And you could figure out where this corner is. That corner's probably like right here on the box. Figure out where the other corner of that piece is on the box. And then you figure that swoops down too. It's right near the horizon line, so you would only see very little of it. I mean, I'm doing rough drawings here because I don't want to spend forever on this. But I want you to see how you think, how you picture this box and how it should fit within there. It's definitely getting a little complicated here. And yeah, and the measuring line, you used the measuring line correctly, but you just had your box way too big, so it just didn't match up. That was your problem there. Can I get rid of the red line? Yeah, I'll leave them there. So now that you used your measuring line to figure out, you know, where this piece would have been, and this would have gone up to the top. You want it to fit within that box. This edge would have gone back to that vanishing point, right? And then you'd figure out where your back edge is. And that is roughly how your boat would fit here. You didn't fit it within the box. You didn't make that box. You didn't use it correctly. Remember, you got to fit it edge to edge. That's the whole purpose here. So your perspective is where you lost points on here. You really, I think you can tell if you look at your model sheet, like this does not look like the same boat as that. And that's the whole purpose of this. And then if you had texture on top of that, that would have just made it even better. And it even could just been like implied texture, some like light lines going back to look like the would have been a lot better. So your design, I think, came out nicely. Your orthographic looks great. It's just your perspective you didn't quite get there. I think either you rushed through it or you just forgot some of the previous ways to do things. But you're like so close to it. So I'd recommend going back and taking another shot at this. But everything else you did in this project is great. Everything else, all your other steps look really nice. I think it was all really strong. And it's just here, you just tripped up a little bit. And that's the important part. And that's why I would really recommend going back and giving it another try, because you want to get your best grade possible here. But also you want to learn this. You want to get this right, because we're going to be still working on perspective as we're moving forward. Okay, let's move on here. So Meg, let's see, you have your teacup here. Let's see. So I'm just trying to look at my notes here, trying to get caught up. Okay. So you got your teacup here. I remember I did warn you to make sure your teacup looks nice and even, and I think you did a really good job with that in your orthographic. I think you did stay consistent, which is nice. This looks like it's might be slightly a little lopsided. This side looks slightly taller than this side, but it's much more minimal. I think you did a good job of really cleaning it up. Although your orthographic, the problem I have here with your orthographic is when we look at the top view, you have it much narrower, from side to side versus, from front to back. But when we look at this view, it looks just as wide as this view. So these don't match up, what we're seeing here. According to what I see, oops, I didn't mean to open that. According to what I see here, this should have the width should be the same, front and to the side. That means it's a perfect circle, but you drew an oval. So this should have been wider. So you lost a couple points for that. It's just not consistent. This step is all about being consistent from every viewpoint. But and your lines are a little bit wobbly. I think this pattern that you made, I think you made life so much harder for yourself because this is a really hard pattern to do in perspective. It doesn't quite look like it's wrapping around exactly. You have to remember when you are dealing with a three-dimensional object that, I guess I might as well open this. So when we have something that's rounded like this, the things that are in the center, like these checkers are going to look big. But then as it rotates around the edge, they're going to get smaller and smaller. It's going to look closer together because it is wrapping around that shape. So you can't just evenly draw these all the same width around this to give it that illusion of depth. These should get closer as you get to the side. And this is a really difficult pattern to do that with, to make them look closer. They also should look like they're wrapping a little bit more curved, so it looks like it's wrapping around a curved object than a flat object. But I think, I did encourage you to do a pattern. I think you chose a particularly difficult pattern, though. And I think it ended up making your object look flatter because of that. I really try to find an object that has a pattern like that. I want you to look at a can and notice the edges, how things start to diminish as it goes around that edge. But then your perspective, so you had some trouble with your perspective, and that's where you lost most of the points this week. This really isn't in perspective. Essentially, you just projected, you made a billboard. It looks like you took the teapot, projected it on a flat billboard here. It does not look round at all. And there's a couple reasons. First of all, these are all ellipses. You did not take the time to draw the ellipses. I told you guys way back before that you're not going to be able to skimp out on ellipses. You can't fake them. And that's what you tried to do. And you didn't do subdivision. You didn't, draw out figure out the circle that it should fit in. Every one of these is ellipses. This is an ellipse. This is an ellipse. This is an ellipse. This and this is an ellipse. Those are every single one of them you should have figured out in perspective, and you did not. So, this doesn't look round. And I think if you look at it, you probably realize, no, it doesn't actually look round. And then also, you have the same problem that the previous one did. Where's the box that you made this fit in? Why would you make your box, it looks like this is the box, right? Why would you make your box this long and only this wide? That doesn't match, the view, what you have here. If anything, this teapot's pretty tall. So first of all, you definitely made this way too long. It's way, way too long. This is even longer than what the teapot looks like in perspective. I mean, I think you just took this viewpoint here and tried to use the measuring line. But remember, this is in perspective and things are narrower than they are when they're not in perspective. So you can't just take a measuring line and measure it from here to here and try to project it back. You have to remember it's smaller. Because it is receding backwards, it's going to appear narrower. So to make this teapot, I would have made, let's go back here. Your box should have been, I'm going to say right here. This should have been the depth of the box. Really, Yours almost fits in a cube. I mean, I guess it's a little bit longer, but the body of this fits in a cube. You literally could have just made a cube and then put the handles on either end. But let's do this. This has got to be this wide, and for it to be a cube, it's got to be a lot wider. I'm essentially going to make, let's see, right here, because it is a little bit narrower. This would be the box that I would make. But remember, you got to make the whole box. You only made the front. You didn't make the whole three-dimensional box here. So I'm going to just eyeball this because this way it doesn't get messy. So I'm trying to, yeah, this is too hard to eyeball. I don't know why I'm doing that. Here we go. Okay, so there's our box. You got to do the whole thing. You can't take these shortcuts. When you try to take these shortcuts, you end up with things that are the wrong shape. So this is the box your teacup should have fit in. Let's zoom in a little bit so you can see. This is the box that teacup should have fit in. And then you should have figured, okay, then you could have used your measuring line. You could have used this measuring line here and had it, this long. That is the purpose, but you have to compare it to this length. So you have, if this is the end of your measuring line, let's change colors. It should go from here through here to wherever the end is, or to wherever your point on the horizon. So let's say there. This is your measuring point. Did you use a measuring point? I see your lines here. They're also not all evenly lined up. I'm not sure how that happened. All these are different lengths. That's another story. But then once you had your measuring line here, then you could, after you divided this up, let's say, okay, this is where the spout is, and this is where the handle is. So let's go from here to here. And these lines are pretty thick. This is getting pretty chunky, but once again, I'm doing this quickly. So that means maybe I'll make this a little bit smaller. It means the bottom of your teapot should have been an ellipse that fits right here. And it should fit from corner to corner. You remember that when we talked about subdivision? So the square that the bottom of your teapot should fit in is essentially this shape here. This is your square. We just figured out the shape, the bottom where the footprint of your teapot should be. So then you should use subdivision to figure out this ellipse. So you'd have this part figured out so you know where the foot is. And then you do the same thing for the top. Essentially, I mean, this is a cylinder. So we know like this ellipse and this ellipse are the same size. They're right above each other. It's a cylinder. So we could essentially just project this up to where that would be and make our cylinder here. But once again, it's an ellipse. You have to figure it out. You'd have to find that square first, figure out the ellipse that it fits in, and then you can make your teapot around it. So then we can make this cylinder, make it rounded like your teapot. Your handle would go back here. But once again, you have to figure out exactly where that handle is in relation to the height here. And then the spout would be coming off the front of this. That's a bad spout, but there's your spout. I actually think I might have made this too short. I probably should have made it a little bit longer. Just a smidge. Or my spout is too long. But no, I think it probably should have been a little bit shorter or a little bit longer. And then you would have to figure out the ellipse that goes for each one of these. And I'm sorry, you can't fake it. You can't fake ellipses. That's why we have a whole lesson, an assignment about ellipses. We worked on it for multiple weeks. So unfortunately, your teapot does not look like, it's not in perspective, first of all. It just looks like a flat banner. There's no depth. This is not an ellipse at all. This is just a straight line. And remember, ellipses will only look like a straight line when they're at the eye level, which is the horizon. So that's where you got tripped up here. And you got to remember, back to that furniture assignment, you're building a box that this fits in and try to reduce these things to their basic shapes. This is essentially just a cylinder. It's a cylinder that's a little bulgy on the sides and a couple more cylinders on top with a handle. I mean, that's all it is. If anything, you could have just made a box for the cylinder. You could have ignored the handle. Obviously, this is a terrible box, but you could have made a box, fit the teapot in here, and then put the handle on it. But you have to remember, things have to fit edge to edge. The whole point of the box is things fitting edge to edge, and you didn't even do that. Like your teapot here, like the tip of this should be sitting in the front. This is the front edge of where your teapot is. It should be touching this line. Like if I was to draw a line straight up from the bottom, this is where the front of your teapot should be. And then the back of this should be touching the back of the box, which you didn't even draw the back of the box. So you got tripped up on a lot of things here. So this is where you lost most of your points this week. You lost a couple points, here and there with your concept and your orthos that I mentioned before. But most of your points you lost were from this. And I would recommend giving it another try. Think back to that furniture. You're just making a piece of furniture here. It's simple shapes. But you always have to start with that box. And you didn't even start with that first step. You didn't make that first box that it fits in. Okay. So please give it another try. Because we're going to be doing more perspective. And I want to make sure you guys really get this. Because it is super, super important. And then, if anything, I would just get rid of this pattern. I would do something simpler. I honestly would just do like a little pattern, like some sort of design that like goes on the front of it here. And then you can just, kind of draw that pattern on there. And I think that'd be much better. This one is lots of complicated things because now these are all ellipses that you would need to figure out in perspective too. And that's a lot. Okay. So most of your stuff here you did was good. All your upfront stuff was good. It's your perspective. You just need some more practice. So please give it another try. Okay, moving on. Christian, I know you said you're getting your stuff in, so get that in as soon as you can. Evelyn, okay. Evelyn, yours came out really good. So let's see. Where are we here? So you were, I think, a little bit behind. You hadn't done your concepts, it looks like. So you did finish your concepts and get them in. Although I like your designs here, just be careful. Your perspective is way off on some of these. Remember, things are wider closer to us and narrower farther away. You kind of reversed your perspective. It should have been narrower here and wider closer to us. If you're trying to fake perspective, this is what it should have looked like. You got to remember those basic perspective rules. Same thing with this one too. If you're trying to fake perspective, it should be wider in the front and a little narrower in the back. Or just do like kind of a fake perspective, which we'll be talking about in later weeks, which is isometric, where everything's just parallel. But, that's where you kind of, even though your designs are good, you did lose, a point for that. But moving on here, your orthographics look excellent. I love your book design. I love this, like, I'm not sure if it's like a gem or something that's on top. It looks great. I love the design of your book. I know that the challenge I've mentioned for many of you here, because a lot of you are doing books, is making sure it's interesting, and you did it. I think this is really unique. I think it looks really good. So great job on that. Your perspective, though, is nearly right. You just made a little mistake here. So let's open up your perspective. Okay, I'm just going to close some of these. Okay, so your perspective here is mostly good. You have a simple form, you fit in right. The only problem is you made it way too long. You forgot about, how things look narrower when they start to diminish and go away from us. And so your book is this wide, but now all of a sudden, if you look at this book, this feels a lot wider than that. Like, look at this gem, like how wide it feels. Really, remember, you got to keep in mind that things are narrower than they appear, when they're straight on to us. So I would have made this here, if anything. Maybe here. And that would have looked more like your book. Otherwise, everything else you did was correct on here. I think I would have liked if some of these things look like they're protruding a little bit more too. Besides, I think this is just a big major problem with your perspective. Other than that, some of these things don't look like they're actually protruding over the book. Let's look at your... I guess it doesn't, according to the design here, it doesn't look like they are, according to your orthographic, but I feel like they should be. Like, these look like pieces that are, like, extruded? Is that the word I'm looking for? They feel like they're actually, like, there's depth here to them. Where's your... And you know what? If this has depth too, then we should see it from the side. So I'm guessing these don't have depth. It's just these look like they do. I'm just curious, according to all the information you did in your orthographic and your perspective, it looks like you planned, it looks like they're flat, they're flush, they're not sticking out. But to me, it feels like these should be sticking out. The way you design this, like, this looks like these are things that are sticking off here. So I kind of am sad that you lost that. You lost that depth and you turned it into a flat image. If you intended this to be three-dimensional and not flat, then yes, these should be sticking out here. This should be sticking out too. Even this, I feel like, should be sticking out. I feel like there'd be so much more interest to this if it had a little depth. And it's just slight things. And if this was actually sticking out, then you'd see it here too. It'd be sticking out the front of the side of the book. So according to the information you're giving me here, it doesn't look like that's what your intention is. But I do think your book would benefit from that, because I think it'd make it look more interesting. It looks like that's what you were thinking. I'm not sure. I can only go by, what I see here. So that's the only thing. I would recommend making them three-dimensional. Other than that, your perspective is nearly right. It's just too long. If you just narrow this down, and then your measuring line would go to there, then it would look like your object in perspective. So overall, you did a mostly good job. That's just the one thing I think you're slightly off on. And I know sometimes it's hard to get that perfect depth, but it's just, I would say you're kind of a lot off. It just feels way too long compared to, your book. It visually does not look like the same book when you have them next to each other. And then your model sheet looks good. I think you laid them up pretty good. There's some, kind of weird empty space here. I wish you kind of center this a little bit better. I want you to think about, where you and how you lay things out on here. But otherwise, I think... this looks good. Okay, so that's really it. It's just your perspective, some minor things. Overall, nice job, though, on this. Okay, let's see. I just want to check my notes. Okay, Derek. So, Derek, you were behind. I'm glad you caught up. Unfortunately, you missed the critique, so I can't go over everything. The only thing I want to mention here, though, your concept stage, this is not what the concept stage was supposed to be. So the idea of the concept stage is you're supposed to be experimenting with how your object could look. So this should be 5 totally different designs of this one object. So this like scepter thing that you designed here, this should be 5 completely different designs of that one object. And that's not what you did here. You already designed your object, you figured out what it looked like, and then you're just drawing like close-ups of different spots of it, right? Like this looks like that, this looks like the bottom. Am I correct? That's what you did here? Yeah, that's not what this is supposed to be. This was supposed to be your experimentation step where you play around with designing different versions of this object. So you lost a lot of points on this one here in particular because this was not what the instructions were. So I'd go back and watch the video and see what I say about that. Otherwise, let's see. Otherwise, I think the rest of your steps are pretty good. Excuse me. So let's move on here to your orthographic. Looks good. Or that's your model sheet. Let's go to your actual orthographic. Yeah, orthographic looks good. I think you did a good job of keeping things consistent, although your chord here gets a little changes width throughout it. So you want to be more consistent with that. Remember, the devil's in the details. But otherwise, your orthography looks really good. Your perspective, though, I think you struggled with here. So you kind of forgot one of the big things. You did your measuring line correct, which is great. I think you even got the length of this looks good, which I'm very happy about. Let me make a new layer here. Yeah, so your length looks good. However, this doesn't look like it's in perspective. Other than the fact that, it is getting narrower as it going back. This feels flat. This feels like the billboard that we did. It doesn't feel three-dimensional. First of all, you should have been building the box that it fits in, and you made the box this long. I don't know why when your object is not that long. And you made it this high too. This was all wasted space. You don't need any of this. You don't need any of this. The box you should have made should have perfectly fit your object. So I would have made it from here to maybe here. And then it goes back. Right? This is what your box roughly should have looked like. It's a long, very long box. Okay. Once you see that, you have to remember that right here, this is touching the very end here. So that means this has to be touching this end of the box. So if we were to find that center, this would be, or actually, I guess this is a little bit taller than this. It's not perfectly square, so maybe your box would have been a little bit taller here. But this should have been where this is touching, first of all. And then this back end essentially should be touching the back center of that box. From there, the major thing that you didn't do that's making this look flat is your ellipses. Because these are all ellipses, and none of these ellipses are in perspective. And you can't fake it. I went over this with you guys. We had lessons on this. You can't fake an ellipse because this ellipse because is a lot farther from, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here. This ellipse is a lot farther from our vanishing point over here. So this should be a lot wider than this one. This should, or whoever's back here, like this should be like a narrower ellipse. And they should get progressively narrower and narrower and narrower. It's really bad. Until eventually, they'd be like a line over here. So none of these were in perspective. And unfortunately, you have to figure it out. You should have drawn, the box that these ellipses would fit in, and you got to do the subdivision. You can get away with using ellipse tools on here, but you still have to figure out the shape of where this fits, because it doesn't look like it fits within this entire shape here. I mean, this ellipse should be a lot bigger than you have. You made them too narrow. You got to think of that ellipse all the way through. So that's where you really messed up. If you had just done like a few of these ellipses throughout here, figure out that box where this one is, figure out the box where this one is, and done it all the way through, then you could have figured it out. And actually, these would have fit. You got to remember, just to make sure I'm being clear, if you were to make the boxes that the ellipse would fit in, it wouldn't fit in the entire width of this because these are narrower. So you'd actually have to figure out, like the box that this fits in, like this piece here, had the like square that it would fit in. So you'd have to like figure out a box literally like this big using, your vanishing points. And then you do subdivision and to figure out what the ellipse looks like. So it's getting a little bit messy here, but I hope that that's clear. Because right now yours just looks flat. Do you see it? Do you see how it doesn't quite look three-dimensional? You got this part right. You got the measuring line right. But the fact that, it's not touching this end, it doesn't look that three-dimensional. And then the ellipses. That's where you unfortunately lost it. That's the difficulty with doing cylindrical objects is you do need to figure out those ellipses. So that's where you lost, I think, your most points this week was from your perspective, because it just, it doesn't look like it's in perspective. So you're doing a lot of things right. I don't want you to think you're doing everything wrong. But isn't quite there yet. Remember, just break it down into its simple shapes. Okay, from there, model sheet. I think your model sheet could have been laid out better. I mean, this is supposed to be like the hero shot, and it's not here. I think you could have done this bigger and made these a little bit smaller. Think about, who you're presenting it to. This is supposed to be the big money shot. So make that a bigger priority here in your model sheet. So I took a point off for that. I want you to think about layout. But otherwise, everything is good. Right file sizes. Give me your Photoshop file. All that. Okay. Nice work. And remember, you can fix this and resubmit it to improve your grade. And it's really the perspective one that needs the work and your concepts. That's where you lost a lot of points too. Okay, moving on. Let's go up here from the center. Okay, Christopher. So I did mention in my first critique, I thought your design, wasn't very exciting, and it seems like you didn't go back and make any changes. You kept forward with it. It's just fine. You wanted to keep going with it. So let's see. Your orthographics, good. You are working with a slightly more organic shape here, but I think you did a good job keeping consistent. Although I would have at least liked to have seen, like, I want to see maybe some of those wrinkles. It's hard to tell, like, which is the top and which is the bottom. I think this is the point here, but I would have liked to have at least seen a couple of those wrinkles here. Yeah, I think that's really it. Let me close these here. And then your... Where is your... Oh yeah, that was your ortho, your perspective. I mean, this is not really filling up your page here, but let's go to this. So you kind of fell to the same problems that a couple other people here have fallen to. So you made a box that your object could fit in. You almost made the whole box, but you didn't fit your object in it. Like, this isn't touching the edge. The whole point of the box is it is the box that this object, fits from edge to edge. And so this should have touched the edges. You didn't even draw the back. If this is the back end, that's where the back end of the box is, and yours is literally coming outside of the box. And I think it's because you didn't draw that back end in. Even though you drew the front, you drew this side, you didn't draw that back end. So now all of a sudden, not only are this one is all not touching the sides, but now this is literally like a third of your hat is outside of the box. So, I mean, that's where you really messed up here. Let's see. And you didn't even use your measuring lines, it looked like. So the whole point, you started your measuring line. Let's see. But you have to then figure out where these things fit in it. So if, let's say, okay, your sheriff badge fits between these two. Once you get to here, you have to project these lines back to that vanishing point. So if we project this to here and project that one there, that means this badge is going to fit between here. So you did the first half, but you got to remember, since this is, it's got depth to it, you got to remember to project that backwards. So really, your hat should have fit with, edge to edge within this box. That's the first thing. Edge to edge inside that box there. And then you used you made the measuring line, but you never used it, You didn't figure out where that badge would be. You didn't figure out where the edge of your hat would be. So this is the line that says where the edge of the hat would be. Project it back here. So that's where this is. And we want to figure out where this spot is. It lines up to here. So we'd figure out that. So this is the ellipse. Maybe let's get a different color. So this is roughly where the ellipse of that one should be. And then your hat should come up from there. And so you didn't even make this fit in your box here. It should fit in the box, edge to edge. Don't make your box bigger than your object. That's the whole point of the box, is to figure out the design of your object. So this is where the hat should be, roughly. And yours is an ellipse. I think you still probably could have used some subdivision to help figure out your ellipse here to make sure it fits. But you can see this should be much smaller than you had. You did a measuring line, but you only half did it. You didn't actually use the information to figure out where things would fit within here. You got to remember, when we were doing the letters, the letters went right up to the edge. But if things are farther back, you got to remember to project that backwards, these lines backwards. So nearly there. Remember, you got to figure out the ellipses too. Can't fake it. Yours are a little bit uneven, so you can kind of get away with it, but you still should have figured out your ellipses. So that's where you lost the majority of your points here today. Well, no, I take it back. You did lose some points, along the way, because I think your concepts weren't that exciting. Your concepts, yeah, I explained to you your concepts back then. You lost a lot of points there too. And you lost a lot of points on your perspective, and then a few points here and there on some other things, but that's where your major points were. Model sheet looks decent. Maybe your hat could have been a little bit bigger. Remember, this is the hero image here, so you want this to be nice and big. Let's see, and I think that's it. Otherwise, you've got your Photoshop file, and everything else looks good. Okay, let's move on here. Maltab, okay, so you had some perspective issues as well here. So let's see. Your orthographics look great. Everything lines up, so that all looks awesome. Your perspective, let us open this up. Let me close some things. Okay, so your perspective here, it feels like you were doing this right at one point, but then I don't know what happened. This was right. What you were doing here, where you had the top of your axe going back to this vanishing point, this was correct. But then I don't know what happened. You somehow second guessed yourself, and then you ended up with this, where now all of a sudden this is going here. But where is this going? Remember, everything's receding to a vanishing point. What vanishing point is this receding to? You already have your 2 vanishing points. Why is it going up? It's not going to anywhere. So you had it. You were doing this right. I don't know what happened. This was correct, where you had it going back to the vanishing point. Maybe it just didn't feel correct because it felt, I don't know, maybe your handle's definitely too big if that's where you were struggling. If you made this handle shorter, this would have been right. Maybe, and this probably was a little, I guess if this comes back here, if your handle comes back here, then this will look long enough. This probably comes down a little bit lower, and this would probably come down a little bit farther. This is probably a case of you made yours too short. You kind of did the opposite of everyone else. I think maybe yours could have been a smidgen longer, but this was correct. What you had here was right. Where the top of this and the bottom of this were all going back to this vanishing point. So something happened along the way. You second guessed yourself, and so now your perspective, unfortunately, is wrong. So let's go back here. So yeah, so this unfortunately isn't using, any of the vanishing points you made. These aren't going to vanishing points up here. And then you have all these ellipses, which guess what? You didn't figure out your ellipses. They don't look like they're correct. Remember, if this is a horizon line, ones that are below the horizon line, we'll be looking down at, and then ones at the horizon line will be straight, and then above the horizon line, they'd be going up, at the very least. But unfortunately, these are all ellipses you should have figured out. Just like that ellipse assignment way back when, you should have drawn the square that each one of these should fit in. Literally, this is the assignment we did, the ellipse assignment, where I had you draw like that cube, that box, and then you had to draw, ellipses in it. That's exactly what this is, just a narrower version. So you should have done that for every single ellipse on here, because it won't look right if you don't figure it out. So the head's wrong because you forgot your vanishing points. All of this is wrong because you didn't figure out your ellipses. So this is where you lost the majority of your points this week. But I know you almost had it. Go back to this one. And I think it just needs to be a little bit longer. And make that handle a little bit narrower, and you are so much closer. Like this one, so much closer. But remember, you got to figure out those ellipses. Unfortunately, it's annoying, but it's what's going to make it look right. So I think that's where you struggle this week. Your model sheet looks great though. I think you lined that up nicely. Yeah, and everything else is good. I mean, that's the major thing where you lost points here. You did do some extra concepts, so you got some extra credit on that. So your grade isn't that bad. But I would recommend trying this again because it is important that you get that perspective correct. And I know I do know you understand perspective. I think you just, maybe got in your head too much. Okay, but please give it another try. Otherwise, the rest of everything looks really good. Okay, moving on. Nicholas. Okay, Nicholas, yours looks great here. So we got your orthos. Everything looks really nice. Everything lines up. Got your perspective. Your perspective is mostly correct here. So you lost a few points here. You did ask for some guidance on how to do this, and you did your box correctly here, which is excellent. There's just a couple things that threw you off, and you even figured out your ellipses down here, which I'm so happy you did that. You did this exactly. This is exactly what, all these other people I've been saying who didn't do their ellipses correctly. This is what I wanted. You figured out that ellipse, and that looks right. This looks right. Great job on that. Unfortunately, you just have a couple things wrong on here. Before I get too deep into this, I want to say most of what you did here is right. There's just a couple things you missed out on. Unfortunately, the handle of this is not in perspective. These are all ellipses, essentially, that are wrapping around it. And as much as I like how you painted it, that little highlight on there looks so nice. It doesn't look like it's in perspective. And this is a really tricky one to do in perspective. They're not exactly straight on. They're at angles. But, these should be a little bit more rounded than the ones that we're seeing here that are closer to the horizon line. So that's not totally reading. This one, though, this is like extremely difficult. Like this is a level I would not expect you to get. So I'm not going to take off, a lot of points for that. But I want you to be aware that it's not correct. And then second of all, your head. So your head looks essentially exactly like it does when it's not in perspective. Like it doesn't look like there's any receding happening here. So it looks like this is probably touching the top edge. Doesn't quite look like this is touching the back edge here. You want to make sure it looks like it's really filling that box. But you got to remember, since this is now rotated away from us, like this, the ball shouldn't be in the center anymore. Like, you have it centered, here. Right now it should be centered perspective wise. So let's see, if I was to actually, let's make a box. We need to figure out perspective wise where that cube, that the center of it should be. So here's the center of the front, and your sphere, it shouldn't be totally centered because it's just like where that edge of that sphere is touching should be here. Your sphere should be farther back. This is that whole diminution and that whole, center. The center doesn't look like where it appears to be. It's farther back than it appears. That's where you messed up on this. And that's what would have given you your depth if you had centered this. Because then it looks like this is overlapping here. And now it has that depth. It looks like it has overlapping. That creates that depth that it looks like this is slightly turned to the side. Because otherwise, this does not look like it's turned to the side at all. This looks like it's straight on, just like this, right? You need that little bit of overlap and making sure it's that this had lined up. And that's what would have done it. I mean, that's really it. If you had fixed this, I think you would have nailed it. Because otherwise, I think everything else looks excellent on here. You did a really great job with this. Nice shading. I think it really looked, you spent time on it and it looks believable. That little bit of highlight on there looks great. But this is what's killing the illusion, essentially. So you're so close. You're so close. So that's the only thing. This one you could probably just try to imply that these were more rounded from there. But if anything, I think if you fix the head, that would definitely like nail this. So otherwise, you did a really nice job, nearly there. Just gotta remember to center everything perspective-wise. But otherwise, a great job. Okay, moving on to Sydney. You got your key here. Let's see. Did I talk about? Oh yeah, sorry. Going back to Nicholas, your model sheet was also good. And everything else was good too. So you didn't lose any points for that, your file sizing and everything. So that's all great. Okay. Sorry. Sydney, moving on to you. So Sydney, you did a really good job too. I love your key design. Your ortho looks really nice. Everything is consistent. So that's great. Your perspective, I love the work you did on here. I even found your perspective grids that you put on here, which looks so great. So excellent job with that. It looks like you found the perspective tool. Yeah, so really great job with that. The only thing I'd say is your key is just too long. It's too deep. I think it should have been a lot shorter. Compared to like if you look at this key, it's like not that long, where this one looks like it's got that really long neck to it. And I think you just made it a little bit too long. I think it should have been just a little bit shorter. I love the box you made here. That looks excellent. But yeah, it's just too long. That's the only problem. Everything else looks great in perspective. So excellent job on that. You probably should have figured out maybe these ellipses. They're a little bit wonky, but they're close enough that I think everything else looks right. So, really great job. And then your model sheet. For the model sheet, I would have taken off the perspective grid on the model sheet because that's part of your presentation. So you did lose, a couple points on your model sheet just because I think you could lay this out a little bit better. We want this to be the hero. The model sheet's all about presentation. And then, file size. So your file size is actually not correct. You did 11 by 17, but you did 72 pixels per inch, not 300. So you lost some points for that, just for file size. You're so close. Everything else is right. You had the right proportions. You just made your file size too small, which is too bad. Once your file size is too small, you can't really make it any bigger without losing quality. But otherwise, I think you did a really nice job here. If you fix your file sizes, that will help some points. But yeah, excellent job. You just lost a couple points here and there for other things that I talked about, but nice work. Okay, Cam. Oh, great job on your sword here. So let's see, you did resubmit your story, which is excellent. Very happy you did that. So that looks great. Let's see. Here we go. Let's see, where is... Oh, so you were behind on your concepts, but you did get them in. Your concepts look great. I love your designs. That all looks excellent. Your orthographic looks really great. Everything lines up. Everything matches up. The only thing I would have said was to put the top and the bottom, put it below that. It's kind of weird having off to side. I know it's a really long object. You also could have just rotated this so it was horizontal. That way it would have better fit your page here. You want to think about page size. That's like a minor thing that, for formatting purposes, I would have done that way. Your perspective looks excellent. Open this up here. I love this. I can see, I found all your work in here, which is great. Even figuring out, where everything lines up looks excellent. And I think it looks like it's the right length. It looks like it is this sword, in perspective, receding backwards. So excellent job on that. Yeah, I don't really have any comments. I think this looks perfect. So that's excellent. And then your model sheet looks good. Once again, if you just put these on the top and bottom and maybe made your sword, it could have been still a smidgen bigger and maybe a little bit farther from the edge if I was to nitpick. But otherwise, this looks great. Excellent job. I've got really no comments for you. I think you nailed this. Your perspective is spot on, which I'm so happy to see. So great work. Okay, next up, Adam, you did an excellent job this week too. You actually, okay, oh, I was going to say something about perspective. Let's do your orthographic first. Orthographic looks excellent. Everything matches up. I love the design you went for. I love that handle, and I love the head of this. It looks super cool and really unique. And I think your orthographic, everything lines up. So great job on that. Oh, sorry. I just was noticing your note again here. You did a great job with the spear. I think you did an excellent job with it. I'm very happy you went with the spear. I think it's a good one that's it's simple in its overall shape, but there's enough complexity in it, especially if you're dealing those ellipses, I'm sure you figured out. But you went above and beyond. Not only did you do this in perspective, you actually did 3-point perspective, which I did not have you guys actually work on here, but you did it. So I'm so happy you did. And your 3-point perspective is spot on here. And I love how you did it. You did it sideways. You did this the right way. Here's your horizon line. Here's your third vanishing points up there. Everything is correct. You really figured out the shape for this to fit in. So excellent job. Love to see your work on here. I think everything lines up. And then you went even above and beyond with your perspective, your finish shot, because you actually did a background and you did, I don't know if it's supposed to be like fire or glass or something. I'm so happy you went above and beyond on this. So excellent job. Your perspective, great. Lighting's so nice on this. I would say just for the future for yourself, I would avoid these kind of brushes. There's certain brushes, there's fire brushes and water brushes and leaf brushes. I would avoid using those if you can, because sometimes you just see the brush shape and it doesn't, it doesn't look real. They're not really great simulations for making things look real. So it's a great shortcut to get this type of texture, but I think if you to really make this match the quality of your sword, if you had hand painted that, it would have looked amazing. Obviously it was not something I had required for this, so you don't need to worry about that, but just for, your own benefit, for digital painting, I would try to avoid those brushes. I think they just kind of take away from the naturalness of everything else. It makes it look a little bit more fake, but otherwise, great job on this. Got no complaints. Your model sheet, this is exactly what I love a model sheet. You really designed this nicely, and I like how you placed your image in there. So yeah, excellent job on this. Okay, and file size, everything else was all great. Okay, moving on. Nathaniel, you also did an excellent job as well here. So you were behind, but you caught up, and I'm so happy you did. You got everything in. All your steps look great here. Your studies look great. Your concepts look really great. It definitely looks like you spend time on them. I have very little critique to give you here because I think everything came awesome. Your orthographics are spot on. That looks excellent. Your perspective is perfect. Well, almost perfect. Let's open up your Photoshop. I think you did a good job on the depth of it. Here, let's close some of these. Okay. The depth looks great on it. The only thing that isn't quite holding up is your ellipses. Everything else, I love all this work that you did here. Everything looks excellent. It looks like the right length, but your ellipses aren't totally believable. You did a good job faking them, I think, but I think it doesn't look like you figured it out. And this here too. Remember, this got a curve curve a little bit more. We're kind of getting a point where you had it there. Maybe you figured out this ellipse. This one looks good. But it's this one, this behind one. You can see how you can see those pointed edges. Remember, it's got a curve behind. And yeah, this doesn't quite look right. It's a little lopsided, minorly off. But otherwise, I think overall your ellipses look believable. Whether or not you figured them out completely, I can't say. But I think excellent job on this. That's the only minor things. Otherwise, your perspective looks spot on. Everything looks great. You kept it nice and simple to, it's basically a cylinder. You thought about the simple shapes that it came from. So excellent job with that. Maybe it's a bit long. It does seem a bit stretched. You might have made it a smidge shorter, but it's so close. And then model sheet looks good. File size good. Everything's great. So you were behind, but you got everything in. So great work. Okay, moving on. And nothing from you. And last but not least, we have Jimmy. So you did your gem here. We have a couple little issues here. So you have I don't want to say benefit. It's because it also makes it harder. But you're dealing with a more organic object here. So it makes it trickier, but in some ways it makes it simpler because you have a little bit more leeway, I think. So let's see, your orthographic looks really good. Everything lines up. We got the depth here. That all looks excellent. Your perspective, let's open this up. Really, the problem is this looks like it's too wide. Remember, things get narrower as they recede. So something straight onto us is going to appear wider than something that's in perspective and receding. So really, the major problem you had with this is you made it too long. The same problem several other people did. You just made this too long. It should have been a lot shorter. I mean, look how narrow this is compared to the height. And then look at this. Look at the height and the width are pretty much the same. You made it a square. I mean, look at how tall these boxes are compared to the wide, and then what happened here. So I think you just made this too wide. I would have made this a lot narrower. I think here at least would have done. So from there, you have a lot of leeway. It's basically like one of the letters. I'm glad you made this fit to the edge here. You made it touch the edge, which I think a lot of people forgot that bit. And you did that, which is great. So if you had just made this shorter, I think essentially you would have nailed this. Although this is not how you do a measuring line. This is wrong. Before I get too excited to tell you did everything wrong. This is not how you do a measuring line. You didn't measure. You're supposed to make your box size here. You remember this? So this is the size of your box. And then your measuring line should be longer. So if this is how long your measuring line is, and then you have to find that measuring point. Where's your measuring point? That's the big thing. And the measuring point is when you connect your measuring line through that back corner to wherever it touches the horizon line. This is your measuring point. And then you can use this to connect to all of these. And that tells you where these lines are. So this grid. And that's important because of diminution. The width of this one is closer to us, so it should appear wider than this one. Each little quadrant should be getting progressively narrower and narrower. My lines are a little bit off, so it doesn't quite look like that. But that's the whole point of the measuring line, is that you get all of this in perspective. You also could have just done subdivision. You don't even need a measuring line for something this simple. You could have found the midpoint, and that tells you where this middle line is, right? And then if you just divided that half in half again, then you have this midpoint. And you could have done that here too. So you don't always need the measuring line. You can use subdivision a lot. But I want you to realize you did not do your measuring line correctly. But this worked out because this isn't a more organic object, so you had a little leeway with it. But otherwise, I mean, everything else looks great. You just lost some points on your perspective here. All your other stuff looks, all the other steps look nice. I just want you to know you didn't do your measuring line correctly, and this should have been shorter. And then that would have helped lay this out a little bit better. And then your shading on this, I think you're getting there. Like, I like these little light pieces here. Some maybe nice highlights. I know I didn't say this had to be full, you know, like full rendered, but like if you had like even some couple like highlights, you know, that could have made this shine a little bit more. But that it looks like a gem. I think that looks believable. But a little bit more of this shading would have been nice. I think it gets a little flat over here because I like the shading you have there. But overall, really nice job. Yeah. So there's just a few things I would recommend taking another crack at that perspective drawing, but I think everything else looks great. Okay. And Jonathan, nothing from you. Okay, guys, that is it. Yeah, I mean, overall, you guys did a good job with this. There's some of you just forgot a few of the rules. Remember, you can go back and watch the video on doing a measuring line. You can go back and watch the video on doing ellipses. This is perspective. I'm gonna be on you guys about getting these things right because there's no shortcuts in a perspective, unfortunately. You have to figure out everything. You're trying to create an illusion, and if you don't, you don't do it right, it doesn't, you don't create the illusion, and then it fails. So that's the whole trick about perspective. We are moving on, doing more with perspective. We're gonna be designing buildings next, so we're gonna be designing bigger structures. So be aware that's what's coming up in a few weeks, but we got a few more assignments leading up to that, minor assignments that will help you with your building when we get to it. Okay, this ended up being a little bit long, but it's a major assignment. It's important. Remember, you can still resubmit anything from this assignment or previous assignments to fix your grade. And once again, feel free to let me know if you're struggling, but I think you guys are getting there. So finish your first assignment. Congratulations, you guys. Okay, have a good week.